This is crazy. This is crazy. And I can see this coming to the UK.
And the House is not going to say no to the NDAA. So that will
Jesus
likely
Christ.
go forward.
Just for the audience, that's what I've been talking about over the last few days. And that's a kind of a clause in the bill, the bill's hundreds and hundreds of pages. It's a clause that essentially, I wouldn't say merge, but kind of integrates the American military and the IDF, the Israeli military. So it gives, why is it so bad? Maybe explain to the audience.
I've been going deep on this, and I created kind of a, as I've been looking at it, I'm a very visual person. So in my own notes and kind of going through it, I created, kind of like a pictograph of how that works here. But really, when you're looking at it, so the National Defense Authorization Act is in the House this year in the 119th Congress. The NDAA is passed every year by law. In the 119th Congress, which is this congressional session, it is House Resolution 8800. That's the entire bill, or the entire bill to become a law. And the NDAA, once signed, does become U.S. law in terms of how and what is to be funded. So in this year's NDAA specifically is Section 224, and a lot of folks have said that, well, that's the merger of the U.S. and Israeli military, and does that necessarily? And the title of that section, the entire NDAA is broken down into sections, hundreds of pages. Section 2 is technology innovation. That's the specific legal section of it. And then portion 24 of section 2, which then allocates section 224, is the United States Israeli Defense Technological Cooperation Initiative. And if you read the verbiage of that, it uses words like merger, fusion, interoperability, all of the words you would see in what is essentially a merger and combining of the two. And when people say, well, nowhere in it does it say that the two armies will become one. No, it doesn't say that verbatim. But if you read the text of it, and it talks about the merger, the fusion, the interoperability, the combining of, well, the Webster's dictionary definition of all of those things mean combining two components or multi-components into one. So this legislation is very concerning, and where it goes now. So in the House right now, this legislation has a very specific pathway towards becoming a law. Throughout the rest of June, it has to be voted on and then approved in the House. And then come hell or high water, whether they have to stay in there, 24 hours a day until they come to a resolution, the House has to pass it, and they have to get it to the Senate so they can start their legislative work after the 4th of July weekend. And then they have until mid-August to then have it all bundled up. The Senate version, the House version, Mike Johnson approves the House version, the Senate pro tempore approves the Senate version. They get combined into one bill. And then there's not two different versions of it that go forward, but then that bill through the rest of late August into September, it gets a legal look by the Supreme Court. And then it goes to the president, at the executive branch here, Donald Trump. And that's how the United States uses its checks and balances, or its three components of legislative, judicial, and executive. And then once Donald Trump signs that becomes law. I foresee that in this fiscal year, Section 224 will survive the House. The only attempt to shoot it down has died. So it's already survived the initial shot to take it out. So next week, it'll go into voting for where the House of Representatives is voting yay or nay to the whole bill. The times to amend or change it, that's done. That happened this week. And like I said, the House is in session today. So that hope died yesterday. So will the House likely pass the NDAA with Section 224 as it is? Yes. The Senate version that it's going through the Senate Armed Services Committee, different in its language. It's not a House resolution, obviously. It's a joint resolution by the Senate. Does that have 224 in it, or not section 224 because it's a different organized document, but does it have the United States Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative in it? It does. So it's very likely that portion will survive the House and the Senate and go into the joint document bill that will go to the president.
So what would that mean? What happens? Just kind of explain it to us. What would that look like?
So
not the process of the bill, the military merging.
Yeah. So after that all goes through, come 1 October, when the fiscal year begins and the NDAA is approved, and that appropriates the money for how the Department of Defense not can but must spend its money. It's no longer an option of, yeah, we'll take a look into that. It's mandated. The fusion of intelligence. So the United States intelligence apparatus, plural, apparati, I guess, is that the plural of apparatus? I don't know. So the plurality of the United States intelligence apparatus, the military intelligence, central intelligence, DIA, NSA, all of those things will then be fused with Israeli intelligence processes and administration and funding and action. The merger of technology and technology development, research and development, prototyping, licensing. This also gives access or sharing of licensing, and then the merger of various command and control or headquarters like entities over Cyber Command, our various space entities. You know, we have the majority of the military, the majority of the United States military is not combat forces, is not the Rangers or the 3rd Infantry Division or combat grunts, boots on the ground soldiers. The majority of the United States military apparatus are administrative and bureaucratic headquarters that dictate how all these things work in terms of mergers. And it's a business. The United States Department of Defense is a business that happens to have a lethal component to it. But, you know, when people think of the military, oh, it's just all, you know, shooting and guns and boots on the ground. No, that's a very small portion of the United States military. So now we're going to see things like DARPA, Training and Doctrine Command, Cyber Command, Space Forces, the various Air Force components that share responsibility with Space Command in low Earth orbit and mid Earth orbit satellite technology and advancements. All that's now going to be merged with Israel's initiative to where they do essentially become one. We're going to see the U.S. budget, the U.S. defense budget, that $2 trillion budget being shared with almost like a joint checking account. Like a joint checking account with Israel, to where, you know, let's say you're in a relationship with your partner and they have their own bank account and you have your own bank account and you both contribute to whatever you both agree to contribute to, and then at some point you decide let's have a joint account, and then you both have full access and authorization to use that account. So if you have a partner that is irresponsible with spending, well then now you're both kind of in hot. Oh, so you're both kind of susceptible.
I knew about the sharing of the intelligence and sharing of the classified information licensing, but what do you mean sharing of the budgets? Like when you're talking about an account, you mean, you know, the American budgets for the U.S. military, that won't have anything to do with the Israeli military. That's completely separate.
Oh,
correct?
Yes. No. That's why. Why do you think now, with the passage of this, with the authorization of the defense budget to what the United States defense will be allocated and budgeted for, Israel will be a consideration in that spending now.
No.
Essentially, consider if you will, the merger of once Israel had their account, the U.S. had their account. We now have a joint account. The U.S. will be the primary account holder, but the Israel will be a secondary on that account, to where what we put into the account will be shared with Israel in terms of initiatives that they pursue. Because if you look at the specific language of Section 224, or the specific language, and I don't want to say just Section 224 because that's not how it exists in the Senate legislature. So I'll just say, I've lately been calling it the DTIC because it's the Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative. So in the U.S.-Israeli DTIC, that language, when you look at the merger of, specifically when it comes to licensing, licensing is proprietary ownership. So if we're going to share that licensing with Israel, well, then they too then are part of how we fund it. So imagine the expanse of the defense budget, the $2 trillion defense budget when it gets passed. That is appropriation through the Congress. We've appropriated this amount, and then it's up to the Department of Defense to then allocate or fund its various subordinate commands: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Space Force. Cyber Command is a sub-unified command of the United States Army, but also then SOCOM. SOCOM is a service-like component. But then within all of that, the Army has to say, hey, Department of Defense, out of that $2 trillion, I want this much. And they get X, Y, and Z, and it all gets allocated. Typically, the Navy gets most of that budget because aircraft carriers and submarines and F-22s and F-35 or F-35s, excuse me, 22s belong to the Air Force, are very expensive. But when you look at how that's going to be funded now, in that legislation, in the U.S.-Israeli DTIC, there is a requirement to put someone in charge of this U.S.-Israel fusion entity, whatever it's going to be, a command, a cell, a task force, whatever it's going to be.
And then there'll be budget allocated for that.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. It's in the verbiage of it, where the Department of Defense must fund and manage and administratively administer.
It is crazy.
Yeah.
It's just.
Sorry for interrupting, but that is insane, So they're gonna get their share. Blatantly now, no hiding, they're getting their share of the US tax dollars. Crazy.
We're just seeing the pillaging of the American military and economy and system and democracy and country as a whole in front of our eyes. It's just so sad. I'm not even a freaking American, and it's just so sad to see. And why no one's talking about it, man.
Is that Ro Khanna, yesterday, I watched C-SPAN through the majority of the day when I didn't have engagements, and I saw Ro Khanna and I saw Nancy Mace's response. Nancy Mace was not a co-sponsor, but she did vote yes to it, yes to terms of that amendment. And if you look at, it seems like anyone and everyone that Donald Trump has either pissed off or isolated in the Republican Party is now moving towards no to Israel. And this amendment, the amendment was shot down, more nays to yays, obviously. But Ro Khanna went up and specifically described each of. Now, here's the reality of how the U.S. military works. Here's the reality, and I worked on it because in my last job as a senior lieutenant colonel in the senior staff doing research and development and product development, I did have my own specific line of accounting. So this is how that works. The United States DoD, within the U.S. Treasury, no joke, has a line of accounting. It is just like if I manage if in my family we have a checking account, we have 3 or 4 checking accounts and a savings account and yada yada yada, right? Well, the Treasury manages that through the Department of Defense, to where the Department of Defense, no shit, just like the Department of Homeland Security or the Department of Forestry and Management, whatever department it is, they all have a line of accounting, a routing number and account number that they draw money from. The United States Army has an accounting number. And within the United States Army, every command has an accounting number. And then within every command, there are subordinate accounting numbers for whatever they're to spend money on, only to spend money on certain things that the NDAA authorizes and dictates it can be spent on. And then there's kind of a slush fund. There's kind of like this, the RNDP, or the Research and Development and Procurement Fund for prototyping, is really kind of a commander's slush fund, where at the 4-star level, they get to determine how that money gets allocated that isn't necessarily dictated by Congress in the NDAA, but kind of a discretionary fund. And when you look at that, so does the Department of Defense. So a lot of that discretionary funding within that is going to be spent on U.S.-Israel DTIC. But also in the NDAA, it specifically says, so now there is a line of accounting, a spending account to where money must be put into to spend on the development of this entity that will now become U.S.-Israeli DTIC. And it will have Israeli officers in it. It might even, we don't know who Pete Hegseth is going to choose, but it is very possible and likely, in my opinion, that that entity will be led and commanded by an Israeli officer.
Man, that is, and it will have its own account number where it can actually withdraw money out of the budget.
Its own account number, its own, it can go to the teller and say, hey, U.S.-Israel DTIC, I want to withdraw X amount of money for this. But here's where this becomes more dangerous in time. So will the NDAA with Section 224, will House Resolution 8800 of the NDAA with Section 224 advance? It will. That hope was shot down yesterday. It's going into voting next week, which is why I'm going to Congress next week to raise hell about this. Am I going to prevent it?
Oh, please.
I'm going. I'm not going to prevent it. I'm going to make noise about it so more Americans wake up to it. But
please, man, please, like go confront these freaking.
The Senate will then put their piece to it, and like I said, right here in the legislative section, these two things from the NDAA come together, and it then goes through the Supreme Court for legal review as a joint resolution before it goes to the president's desk. And he takes out this big binder and he takes out his Sharpie marker, and that's what he'll be signing. And bam, now it becomes a law, and it goes right back down to the Department of Defense to appropriate in accordance with law. That's happening. That is
does
going
the,
to
does
happen.
does the NDA say how much should be appropriated to this new Israeli U.S. department?
So here's the thing: the NDAA itself specifically does not specify the amounts.
Explosions on.
He just gets interrupted by some breaking news, but that is crazy. Like there'll more than likely be an Israeli officer in charge of drawing funds from the defense budget of the American taxpayer pot. Crazy. I'll skip ahead to where they get back into it.
It'll have its own account number. Who decides how much to allocate to that new entity?
So the National Defense Authorization Act allocates the total amount of appropriation that will come out of the United States overall budget, the budget that also has to be passed. And again, I'm sure you heard of the United States does a continuing resolution. All that is a stopgap to the budget that Congress is supposed to pass. So we're not going to have a budget come 1 October. We're nowhere close. We will have a continuing resolution. And within that continuing resolution will be last year's funding line for the Department of Defense to where it will be increased to what is now $1.9 trillion. And that will be appropriated to the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense then determines which accounts get filled with what amount, how much you get Army, how much you get Navy, how much you get Marine Corps, how much you get. And then within those specific services, they allocate down. This DTIC, this cell or command or whatever this U.S.-Israeli DTIC is going to be, who's going to command it, what service component it's going to belong under. I highly anticipate that it's probably going to belong under USASD SOLIC, or the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict. I highly believe it's probably going to fall under there because that secretary has oversight over U.S. Cyber Command, which is a service-like entity, and U.S. Special Operations Command, which is where this U.S.-Israeli DTIC will likely reside in the majority of its functions. So what I see is that this will go in, Department of Defense, Pete Hegseth will then determine, hey, U.S.-Israeli DTIC, cell, command, component, whatever, it's going to reside under ASD SOLIC, and ASD SOLIC's going to manage it, and here's how much money you're going to get for it. That's just to stand that organization up, give it command, give it manning, give it administration oversight, give it a budget to operate. But then that entity starts going to Congress and saying, hey, we need X, Y, and Z, just like all the services do. And we're going to see an increase in that. So as I've said, I don't know what that dollar amount is going to be yet, but it will be substantial, and it will double dip between two service-like components, cyber and SOCOM, through the Assistant Secretary of Defense for that. Again, that's ASD SOLIC, Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict, my old bosses. So when you look at that, how that ties back into the budget, it gives them a direct line to say, gimme, 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 put money into my account. If we continue to see the trend of a U.S. Congress that is pro-Israel, or at least the idea that that we must merge and fund this entity, it will probably get substantial funding. What that dollar amount is, no one knows. That hasn't been decided.
That
There you go. Crazy. All the money they put in obviously pays off, doesn't it? But this is coming soon. 1st of October, they start getting funds for the joint American-Israel operations. Dark times ahead. Madness.